Welcome to the Giving Power to the Business Owner webinar series. I'm your host, Jacqueline Jackson. And today we're going to actually talk with a property commercial company that's going to talk to us about mastering our lease negotiations and our real estate success. We are going to be talking with Jeff York. Let me give you a little background on Jeff. First of all, we love Jeff. What Jeff does, he kind of helps a lot of business owners. As some of you already know, Giving Power to the Business Owner is a platform where we're giving information and resources to business owners that sometimes they may not really put a lot of thinking into it. That's why we bring these guys on and these professional experts on so you guys can ask them questions and at least have their contact information when you can reach out to them. Now, Jeff has been in a commercial real estate advisor for over 40 years. He has helped executive and business owners find offices, warehouses, and also represents you for, let me make sure I don't want to miss out anything on yours. Offices, warehouses, and even manufacturing plants areas you want to get, he can help you find that because I know a lot of people are starting to get into manufacturing. And that's why we wanted to bring Jeff in. So he can help you locate that and take in consideration the data that goes with that. You need to do that. Now, his firm specializes in tenant representation services, which means he doesn't represent the property. He represents you, okay? Which means you have a resource that can give you information insights information for you to make a decision on what property you want to get and why, okay? So your property company, which is his company, is in partnership with the ITRA Global Network, and he negotiates millions of square feet of transactions on behalf of the end user. Now, the company never charges the clients for its service. It is compensated by the landlords or the seller only after the lease has been signed or the closing has been finalized. So that means that we need to at least reach out if we're looking for any type of property to Mr. York, okay? So he can help you. So let's go in and get it started. First thing I want to do is welcome Jeff to our show.
Well, thank you, Jackie. It's a pleasure to be here, and that information was spot on. I don't have to correct you about anything. So you did your homework, and I really appreciate it. And yeah, as Jackie mentioned, I am a commercial real estate broker, and within the umbrella of that industry, there's a specialty known as Tenant Representation Advisory Services. And we represent companies when they are looking for office space or industrial space. And we do that here in the DFW Metroplex. And I have partners nationwide. So if your business is based here and looking for another location across the state or across the country, we can help you find it. And by way of a brief introduction, I've been in the business for over 40 years, and I have been married for 32 years. I have a daughter who is in public relations in Miami. We were in Florida for most of our adult lives, and we moved to Dallas like everybody else is moving to Dallas. We moved here 8 years ago. And we love the energy here in North Texas, and we're glad to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for that information. That's what makes you so great to work with, Jeff. You have a personality, but the thing that we love the most about you, you're passionate about what you do. You know, you really want to help the business owner and to find the property that they need. And that's what I want them, our listeners, to see today, that that's what you're about as well. So what we want to do, let's get started. I know you and I had talked about this, but let's start out with you explaining the difference with what you do and what residential realtors and all they do, because a lot of people got it all kind of confused. So if you could start off explaining what you actually do.
Sure. Well, we are licensed commercial real estate brokers, and yeah, most people are familiar with the process of buying a house. And when you buy a house, typically you will have a buyer's agent who represents your side of the transaction, and there will be a seller's agent or the listing agent who represents the seller. We're sort of the equivalent of the buyer's agent, but in commercial real estate. And most companies lease their space on long-term leases. So we are the advocate on behalf of the company that is occupying the space. So we are very singularly focused. We have zero conflicts of interest. So we represent the user, the tenant, or the buyer when they are trying to find space.
Okay, so which is different, like you said, different from how when we purchase a home. Because a lot of business, a lot of business owners, we come from that private sector. So we have to learn what's available for us as business owners that's different when we're dealing in that private sector, right? So that's why we want to bring you on. So we're talking about the lease and getting the property. And before I go into those questions, I thought about that if you could, because I know you're pretty good at this, is that what is the advantage of them using you compared to not using you?
Sure. Well, there's a big advantage. What a lot of companies don't realize is if you're driving around and you see a sign in front of a building, and you call the broker whose name is on the sign, he or she is not going to tell you that they are representing the owner of the building. Their fiduciary and legal obligation is to represent the interests of the owner. And the owner is, more often than not, a sophisticated real estate investor. And if they have an expert representing their side of the table, it's really incumbent upon the tenant to have an expert representing their interests as well. So companies really need to understand that they're spending a lot of money on their space. After their labor, the cost of their real estate is one of the biggest line items in operating a business. So you can spend a lot more money than you need to if you don't have adequate representation. So we are there to safeguard your interests as the tenant, and we have access to proprietary information that you're not going to get simply by doing a Google search and trying to find out on your own what might be out there.
Right, that old Google, boy, how do we use old Google?
Well,
And
it can be a good tool, but it is not going to arm the tenant with the information that they need to get the best deal.
exactly. And that's why we have this so they can actually, contact you, get in touch with Jeff so you can get those questions. But the big thing is, like I said, we have this so people can see what is actually going on behind the scenes or what you need when you want to do your business as far as purchasing property. So that's what we have you here for. And I'm looking forward to this going forward on it. So now let's go to this based on what you were saying that you're representing them. So basically, you help with the negotiations with the other realtor or the owners, right? So
Correct. We represent the tenant's interests. We meet with the tenant. We understand the tenant's objectives. Where they want to be, what the characteristics are of the building that they're looking for, what their time frame is, what their budget is, what style of building they're looking for. There's a myriad of questions that we have. And then once we have those answers, we conduct research and we identify buildings that meet the tenant's objectives. And then once we have a list of buildings, and a list could start out with 50 or more buildings. It's our job as their advisor to manage our time effectively and their time effectively, because nobody has time to go out and tour 50 buildings when you're trying to run a business. So we'll come up with a short list and arrange a tour of the buildings with the listing agent. The listing agent represents the landlord, and we show up representing the tenant. And then on the basis of the tour, if we do our job effectively, we will have identified several buildings that could meet the tenant's needs, and then we'll move forward with the negotiation process.
exactly. So I just to give what you're saying, how important you guys to have them. Now notice all that he said, which is a lot, it's free to you. It's free. He's giving you information that's free to you because remember, he doesn't charge us, right? So my thing is what I'm finding out is like we've actually had a client, just to attest to what you're saying, that I got him with a commercial. At least I thought he had. I didn't get it. He had one. But then we found out later when he went to apply for a loan that his lease and amount he was paying was way more. Like you said, it should be a certain amount of what your expenses are. He didn't know that. And so he not only did he get it where the lease was not really great for him, but he also did a lot of work inside that property. You know what I'm saying? So he did a lot of tenant improvements, and
Right.
basically, he lost it in 6 months in. 6 months
And
into
it cost him a lot of money.
it
That's a
did.
shame.
So again, I know you see stories like that. That's why it's important for us to have representation with us, because you have the knowledge we don't have. All we have is Google and what Google's going to give us. Let's be real. That's all we have. But you can come more with the detailed information. So let's start with our first question is like, what factors most impact lease negotiation, and how can a tenant leverage them to secure favorable terms?
And before I answer that question, Jackie, I'm a big believer in brevity and in the TED Talks concept, because we're in, like I call it, ADD nation, and I think people have short attention spans. So I'm going to try to keep this brief, and if I go over something a little too quickly, people can follow up with me, offline. But I expect we'll be through this within 25-30 minutes. That's the goal.
That's the
So
goal. I got you.
there's five main factors to answer your question that will affect the how negotiable a landlord will be, and the final outcome. There's the length of the lease. Most leases are anywhere from 3 years to 10 years. There's the cost of the tenant improvements. How much money is the landlord spending to adapt the space to meet the tenant's needs? What is the creditworthiness of the tenant? That's always going to be critical because the landlord is spending a lot of money up front.
Now let me ask you,
Um,
Jeff, not try to break you off. So on
yeah.
the credit, you actually will make sure that your tenant, your client, is credit worthy for what they're trying to get. So you'll help them to figure
Well,
that.
I will address that with my client up front about the importance of having their financial information prepared and readily available, because it's really not any different than going to a bank for a bank loan.
Okay.
You're going to a landlord wanting the landlord to front the improvement costs. So the landlord is going to scrutinize your financial condition because they want to make sure that you're going to be there for the full term of the lease.
Okay. So
Um,
basically, Jeff, you're saying people need to come with their financials. You need to see what profit and loss and a balance state is what you.
yeah, profit and loss and a balance, see if it's a
Okay.
privately held company, and it's no information that the tenant isn't otherwise going to have
Right.
available anyway, because if
Right.
they've been in business, they've got a banking relationship. I'm not asking that, or they prepare their taxes every year, so their annual tax return would be fine. They don't have to prepare anything special that they don't already
Right.
have readily
Yeah.
available. But it's very important to be forthright with the owner of the building in advance in order to get the best deal possible. And then the other two factors are the overall market conditions, which will vary sub-market to sub-market, but most people know that in the office market, there's a lot of vacant space out there. The industrial market is somewhat tighter, but because we're in one of the biggest industrial markets in the country, there's a lot of industrial
But let me
space
ask you this,
available as
Jeff.
well.
With it being a lot, does that mean that you can negotiate a little bit better? Is that what that means?
Well, it
Your
really
thought?
depends, and that gets me to my last point, which is the specific motivation of the
Mm,
specific landlord at the time of the negotiations. Because you could be dealing with an institutional owner like Prologis that has, you know, billions of square feet nationwide, and it doesn't matter to them if they have a vacancy in one of their buildings. Or you could be dealing with an individual owner who has just a couple of buildings, and he's not getting 50,000 a month rent, and every month that goes by he's missing out on that $50,000. So he's going to be a lot more motivated. It really depends on, you know, is the building, has it been empty for 3 months or has it been empty for a year?
Right.
Is it a building that the owner wants to get leased up and sell right away once he has a good tenant? Or is it something that the owner wants to hold on for the long term? So there's a lot of factors that are going to come into play as to uh, how good of a deal the tenant can ultimately get.
Okay, with all that. And notice the things that you're saying, they're not going to give us that information.
That is correct. They're certainly not going to volunteer anything. And if you don't know what questions to ask,
Right.
then they're going to make it seem like you're getting the best deal possible, but you don't really know for sure.
Right.
And so that sort of leads into, what lease terms are negotiable. And most commercial leases are very long. They're too long. They
Right.
can be anywhere from 35 to 50 pages. And if you haven't signed a commercial lease before, you might be surprised when you sign your first one. In many cases, they're longer than a purchase and sale agreement. So
Wow.
within these 35 to 50 pages, it is not uncommon for there to be 20, 25 different issues which are negotiable. And I'll just rattle them off, a few of them. How long the lease is, how much money the landlord is going to spend on the improvements, when does the lease begin, how much free rent is available. There may be a
Right.
bunch of free rent, there might be no free rent. How much does the rent increase every year? Could be a few percent, it could be more than a few percent. Uh, how are operating expenses treated? That would be things like property taxes, building insurance, common area maintenance. How is the air conditioning handled? Who pays for after hours electricity and how much? And then what are your options? Do you have an option to expand into adjacent space? Do you have an option to contract? Do you have an option to renew for
Right.
another term of 5 years or 7 years? And what's the case? How much are you going to pay if the lease ends and you're still in the space? The
Right.
landlord may want 200% or double your rent. So those are just um, a dozen or so examples. There's a lot of issues that are negotiable, which is why it's important to have an advisor on your side of the table.
Exactly. To actually get see and all that, like I said, again, I'm reiterating how we would not know it. It's so really important for us to have professionals in our business life, to actually take on those parts. And I'm finding out that a lot of the services is like yours, is that like, we're not charging up front, but we're going to get you set up. And once we get it done, then we'll get paid. And that means that you could have gotten dependable knowledge information before you actually bought. Again, I'm going back to my client that
Yeah.
once we looked at his contract, because he's going through all that, there were certain things that in negotiation he did not negotiate. He didn't even know he could,
Yeah,
and,
well,
and you
that's a really good point, Jackie. And what I also tell my clients is, look, you've got an attorney to handle your legal affairs, and when your attorney does work for you, they're going to bill you by the hour. You have a CPA that does your taxes
Mhm.
quarterly, annually. That CPA charges you money for the CPA's time. As commercial real estate advisors, we work for free unless and until your company signs a lease or buys a building. And our time period working for you could be a couple months, it
Right.
could be a year. So we are advocating for our clients, but we don't get paid until the very end of the transaction. And then when we do get paid, we get paid by the owner of the building. And then the fees are built into the rents that the tenants pay. So there's no cost to the tenant to engage a commercial real estate broker to represent their interests.
And that's what we need to look at. So being having a commercial broker, which makes us get us to have a little bit more information about what we need to do. Now, using you is good for it. Now let's break it down. I know we do offices. So you have a business that just want to move into an office in a building somewhere, you can help us find that, right?
That's correct. We
Okay.
do office, we search for office space and we search for warehouse space. And
Right.
those are our areas of specialty. There are other brokers who specialize in commercial retail, like restaurant space.
See.
And we can do it, it's just not our area of expertise. There's also brokers who represent an investment real estate where they're selling assets that have income streams. Again, it's just not really our expertise. I believe in sticking with what I know, and that's helping companies find office space and warehouse
And
space.
warehouse space. Now, you and I had had this discussion before, but I think we need to clear that up. Remember, I had a person that wanted to purchase a coin laundry. He said, I just want to buy a building with a coin laundry and everything in it. And I think we had talked to you like, well, that's not buying a building, that's buying a business. And so,
Right. There's another area of expertise called
right.
business brokers, and that's when the actual ongoing business is being sold because it has a revenue stream and it's developed goodwill, it has a customer base. There are business brokers that will sell the business. That's not what we do. We just
Right.
help
Now,
companies.
even though it's property with it, it still falls under that business purchase,
Yeah,
yeah, business purchase, right? Because it has property
correct.
with it, doesn't change that. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that was something we learned as well. So, because a lot of people thought that if I'm looking for like somebody that asked, they want to look for an automotive place. I found one. It's a building, and everything. I need to get a commercial, uh, representation for it. But I'm like, if you buying everything inside that, along with his books, like you said, his customers,
Right.
all of that, it changes what that
Right,
is.
and I've got business partners who can help them with that. It's just
Mm-hmm.
not in my wheelhouse.
Exactly. And the good thing about you all, anybody, get with Jeff either way if you're not for sure what it is, and Jeff can direct you which way to go. He has a network of people, like you said, he got business brokers and he have the ones to deal with the specialty restaurants and things that he don't. That's why you want to put him in as part of your team, period. If you're looking for office space, warehouse space, you need someone that knows the areas and need to know the traffic data. You just need to have data to make decisions. And that's what we don't do. We just use Google. Google is all we got, and that's what we use.
That's
So,
right. Jackie, let's move on to the next one.
so now we're looking at how long does it typically takes to do like a new office build out?
Yeah, that one thing that most companies underestimate is how long it takes to get into space. Um, it can take anywhere from 4 to 6 months for new space to be built out. I'll give you an example. A lot of industrial deals we do, the building's just an empty shell, and so it needs a brand new office to be built in the corner. Or the existing offices that are already there are 30 years old and they need to be demolished and start over. So a lot of people get hung up on how long it takes to build out the space, which might only take a couple of months. But what they forget about is the time to design the space and to get a building permit. So it can be easily a 4 to 5 month process for the owner to deliver new space within a building. And that's from the date a lease is signed. So
Okay.
it could be, 2 to 3 or 4 months just to get to a signed lease. And then it could be another 4 or 5 months for the space to be. So that's why we encourage our clients to start the process early.
So what do you think they should be doing during that time that they're dealing with the build out? So what do you think they should be doing during that time?
Well, that's very specific to their own unique business. There's a lot of tech, if it's an industrial, they might have to get racking for the entire warehouse and racking that's custom to the new space. Maybe the new space has 36-foot ceilings and their old space had 18 or 24-foot ceilings. So there's industrial equipment that has long lead times on ordering. There's things like technology, cable, data, fiber. You need to get those vendors lined up. Um, uh, every industry is unique as far as lead times. The point I was just trying to make is that the time it takes for the landlord to deliver a space usually takes longer than the company
Company
going
is
into the
playing.
space thinks it's going to take. So
Exactly.
planning ahead cannot be underestimated.
Okay, so let me ask you this. We're talking about the tenant improvement, and hopefully you can help on that. Now, tenant improvement, do I know you mentioned the owner, is it any time that the tenant would pay for those tenant improvement? And do
Yeah,
y'all what
there
do you
is a
pay?
time when the tenant would pay for it. It is more common in retail real estate.
Okay.
If a company is almost any kind of retail, the owner's going to look to the tenant to build out their own space. There are exceptions to that, but in office and industrial, uh, it's the owner is going to fund the cost of those tenant improvements. So in that example that I just talked about, where you've got a warehouse and the owner's got to build out an office inside the warehouse,
Mm-hmm.
the cost of office space of construction has gone up dramatically in just the last 3 years, just like the cost of everything has gone up
Right.
dramatically. Food and fuel and insurance. Um, so what we are seeing now is, to use a round number, it can be $200 a square foot for office construction. So if you picture a 5,000 square foot office that might have 20 employees, and the 5,000 feet is in the corner of a 50,000 foot warehouse, well, it could cost the owner of the building $1 million to build out that office space. And that's why the owner of the building wants to make darn sure that the tenant has good financial
Right.
credit, and that the tenant is going to perform under the lease.
Okay, exactly. Because like back going back to my story, he put a lot in there, and then but so happened he paid for it. That's the thing. It wasn't
Yeah,
no
the owner of the building and the owner's lender, they will have a bucket of capital set aside for
mm,
tenant improvements. So, and it might not just be office space. It could be, it'll be lighting, warehouse lighting. It could be electric if the company's a manufacturer. It could even go toward dock equipment like dock levelers, major industrial fans. All of that can be a very significant cost, which the tenant, if they owned the building, they'd be paying for that themselves. But because the one reason why companies lease space is it requires a lot less capital starting out than when you buy a building.
right.
And I can go over an example of that later.
Okay. Well, definitely we want to do that. So we want to learn that. I mean, you can go over it now if you want to go ahead and go over with it, because we definitely want people to know about that.
Well, it's just to give you an example of a 50,000 square foot space where the rent is $10 a square foot. That's $500,000 a year, or $40,000 a month for rent plus operating expenses. So, in order to get into a building as a tenant, you got to pay your first month's rent in advance, and you got to pay a security deposit equal to the first month's rent. So in that example, the tenant might have to pay anywhere from $80,000 to $100,000 up front. So that same building, if they want to buy a 50,000 square foot building, it could be an $8 million purchase,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to have to come up with
So you put it
25%
down,
as
right?
a down payment.
That's
So
right.
you'd have to come up with $2 million up front to buy a building versus $100,000 up front to to lease the same size building. And that's why, most big companies lease their spaces instead of own, because it
Mm,
just gives them a lot more flexibility. There's a defined period of the lease. If the building no longer meets their needs at the end of their lease, they move out of the building. And that's that. if a company owns a building and they want to sell it, well, there's no guarantee that the building went up in value over time. And then there's no guarantee that it can sell in 90 or 120 days. It could take 6 months, it could take a year. So, so there are, when companies lease space, they're able to deploy their capital more into the business than into the real estate.
Right, and doing that. Thank you. So let me ask you this. So and I know we're gonna be wrapping up pretty soon, but what are some steps that you think people should take when they actually gonna start negotiating leases?
Well, the steps are to ideally they should engage a commercial real estate broker to
Okay.
represent their interests.
Right.
And if they're looking to lease space, of course, I would love it if you would reach out to my company, but all you have to do is Google, tenant representation advisors in whatever city you're looking for space. In a big market like there's hundreds of them, but you want to engage a broker to represent your side of the table. Usually there will be an engagement letter, a representation letter, and that designates the broker as your authorized representative. And it helps you and it helps the owner because the owner knows that the tenant's representative and it is represented, and the owner knows that they're only dealing with one broker. And our agreement states very clearly that there's no charge for our services, that we are paid by the owner of the building. And our agreement also gives the tenant the right to cancel the agreement
Hmm.
if they're not satisfied with our services. Had anybody do that, but I offer that as a good faith gesture that if you don't feel that we are doing the that you expected us to do, then terminate the agreement and you can go on your own and find somebody else.
Okay, and that's great because you know your services is gonna make them stay. You know what you guys offer and how much you all work with the business owners to get the warehouse, to get the office space, because that's what everybody's kind of going on now. It's more about how people are taking care of each other. And that's why we're bringing in people that we feel comfortable about our company to actually endorse you guys and put you on our referral page. Now, Jeff information is in the chat, so you all can have that to reach out to him. We're also going to have Jeff on our TDJ Equity Funding Insiders, which is our page right there. If you can see my head, there it is. Okay, so if you go to our website, Jeff actually will be on a referral page where you guys can link to him and set up appointments and talk to him because we definitely want to do that. Before we get out, what is some of the last thing that you would like the business owners to be aware of?
Um, I would just say to be prepared for a process to take longer than you think it's going to take. It's you know, a few years ago, I did a deal with a national company, and we toured space on a Monday of Thanksgiving week, and we
Mhm.
had a lease signed on Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, 5 days from start to finish.
Wow.
That happened once in 40 years. So
Okay.
it just doesn't happen. The
Okay.
process really takes longer than anybody realizes. I would say start planning for a move a good 9 to 12 months before you think you need the space, and
Mhm.
definitely start looking at buildings 6 to 9 months
Mhm.
before you think you need the space.
That's good.
Now, there could be a situation, like with office space, for example, in a big building where the space is already built out. The owner
Mhm.
could have all refurbished it. It could be brand spanking new and beautiful space. And in a situation like that, the time cycle is compressed, much shorter. Then it's just a matter of touring this space and negotiating a lease and getting through a lease. And it is possible to get a deal done in 30 days,
Wow.
but it's rare. I would say to plan, at least 6 months ahead of time.
Right.
Have your financial information prepared, and volunteer that to the listing agent or the landlord before they ask you for it. They're going to ask you for it
At some
eventually,
point in
and
time.
if you're proactive and you put it in front of them before they even ask you for it, it's really good faith on your part.
All
So
right.
just plan for a process. It's going to take a lot of time, and be represented. Have an advocate on your side of the table, whether that's my firm or another qualified advisor. The landlord has somebody representing them,
Mm-hmm.
or the seller has somebody representing them. So you deserve to have somebody on your side of the table, and it's not going to cost you anything.
To do it. Okay. Well, thank you so much. So, to our listeners, want to thank you guys for coming in today to our Giving Power to the Business Owner. Mr. York is available for you guys. You definitely want to encourage that you reach out to them. We will have a replay of this available on our YouTube channel for you guys to get as well as those have registered. We will be sending this out as well. So we want to thank you all so much for being a part of us today, and we look forward to seeing you on our next Giving Power to the Business Owner webinar. You all take care. Thank
Thank you, Jackie. Take
you. All right.
care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.